go ahead and turn the meeting over to Padmaja.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on building emotional competence and social togetherness. Thank you very much for joining us. What are we going to be talking about in this webinar? And it has actually become even more relevant at this time, but I will address it. How do we do it virtually a little later? But I am going to focus now on assuming everybody is, if you are not already, but you are beginning your in-person classes. And we will get back to our usual routine. So the focus today is on mostly young children. Let's say the target population is early childhood and early elementary and the elementary school level and early childhood. That's the student population. How do we provide them with opportunities for social connections, social togetherness? And one of the essentials for that is they need the emotional competence to be able to communicate, to be able to socially engage, and to develop friendships, and to be able to have that positive feeling that comes from social connections. So we are going to be looking at some kind of, what kind of environmental as well as instructional scaffolds that you can create that helps promote that togetherness. And in order for children to have that, especially children who have autism spectrum disorders or significant cognitive communication and social emotional difficulties, how they need a foundation, a strong foundation in social emotional competence in order to be able to communicate, in order to be able to have social connection. So we're going to be looking at how do you use games? How do you use stories? How do you use group activities? Both to advance academic skills, but at the same time, bring children together to connect with each other. With that introduction, let me find out who have joined us today for this webinar. Okay, let me find out who you are. Please go ahead and take the poll. Thank you. Okay, there are lots of occupational therapists and special education teachers and speech and language and administrators. We do have a very diverse group today, and maybe some parents have joined us too. No. There are some professionals, speech pathologists. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, the largest group seems to be the occupational therapist, and we certainly need them because they are one of the most helpful people in enabling the social togetherness. Okay, I hope you got to see the result. And a little bit about me. I'm an author of all the books that you see on the slide. I have written books in the area of early childhood education, autism, and severe disabilities. And this particular book that you're seeing here, the autism spectrum disorders, the focus is on behavior strategies and teaching strategies in the framework of behaviors. And a completely revised, rewritten second edition is coming out in a couple of weeks. So, and I also provide educational consulting services. And in addition to that, I am fortunate to be running a nonprofit organization so that we bring school systems and families together how do we empower and engage families so that they can be great supporters for what we do in school districts. So let me find out a little bit. We do have a very diverse group of speech pathologists, administrators, occupational therapists, and many different therapists and teachers and paraprofessionals. What skills do you think, I'm trying to move this a little bit out of the way. What skills do your students need, do you think, in order for them to be successful with their social interaction and to establish connections with the other children? What do you think they need? What are some skills? Let me see your thinking, then we can blend it with what I am thinking too, which must be very similar. Do you think they need to initiate, reciprocate, and engage in back and forth conversation? This is a poll, so you will get to see it in just a few seconds. Do you think they need to exercise self-regulation and impulse control? Do you think they need to understand non-verbal communication? Because a lot of us speak through our facial expression and through our body language. And do these children understand that? Do they need that? Do they use problem solving, especially when they are in a conflict, especially if you see a child who is going and grabbing something from another child, or who is pushing someone when they are lining up? Do they need problem solving? And when you have group activities or group tasks, either in they're playing a game or when they are working on a task together, do you find that they need to learn how to be cooperative? Okay, let me see. I'm looking at polling too. Okay. So many of those things that I mentioned, you would see it. What skills do you need? It'll be interesting to see. Okay, I see initiating, reciprocating, and engaging in back and forth conversation. That seems to be one of the highest. Oh, so is understanding nonverbal communication. That because a lot of our communication is through body language and facial expression. So it naturally makes sense. Let's see. Okay, so I think you can see the results. And of course, initiating, reciprocating, and engaging in back and forth, as well as understanding nonverbal communication are the top priorities or the things that you feel. So let's close this and move on to the next slide. So these are some of the things. I totally agree with you that being able to initiate communication is extremely important, and also reciprocating when somebody is trying to communicate. But can we provide some scaffolds? Can we provide some structuring? Can we facilitate that? How can we do that? Is one of the things we can talk about in this webinar. I'm going to be talking about. In addition to that, the body language. That, on the other hand, may be a little bit more challenging, because for that, first of all, especially children with autism, we need that kind of joint attention, okay? And maybe we have to intentionally try and teach that to the children. So what are some of the problems that may be coming in the way of their being able to connect with others? How do we try to overcome these difficulties? So is it the problem is because some of the children have very limited speech, or as you all pointed out, understanding the nonverbal communication and the initiating and the reciprocating. And also another important thing is they may say hello and they may smile, but let us say another child engages in a conversation with them, Are they able to maintain that conversation? And are they able to establish that conversation and then look for it again the next day and the next day and the next day, so that they can develop a kind of a friendship with that particular child? My focus here is not so much the connection with the adults, but the connection with their peers. And then one of the other problems that some of the children have, which kind of comes in the way of their establishing connection, is when they have tantrums or when they have behavior issues, and that causes a kind of a scenario in the classroom that may, especially with younger children, that may scare them, and they may move away from that child who really desperately needs to communicate with others, but exhibiting some of these problems. And do these children have the necessary problem-solving skills? Because these are all things, either we can provide scaffolds, or we can facilitate, or we can actually teach the children how to engage. And how do we promote that through group activities? How do we get them to participate? So what we're going to be looking at is, first and foremost, even though one might think, why do we need social emotional competence and literacy? But unless they have that, it becomes very difficult for them to establish that communication. So we have to strengthen their emotional literacy and competency. So I'm going to share with you a number of activities, as well as we have to make sure they have self-regulation. And in order for that, and impulse control, for that, we have to teach them the calming strategies. And then how do we facilitate that connectedness and friendship skills through intentional teaching? And then how do we use games? We often think in terms of teaching, but are we thinking in terms of actually playing games to teach academic skills? Let's think of, for example, a couple of scenarios that I often find in the classroom. For example, there is this child with autism spectrum disorder. And this is something I actually saw in a classroom. This is a kindergarten classroom. And these two children, they're twins, both of them have autism. And they were participating in this inclusive kindergarten classroom, which is wonderful. However, both of them had a paraeducator sitting with them. In other words, the paraeducator had these children right in front of them, and the teacher was in the front, and the paraeducator facing the teacher, and the children facing the teacher, but the paraeducator was right behind them, sitting, actually touching them. And every time, especially one of those children stretched his legs, she tried to put him back so that he will sit cross-legged. And this went on not once or twice, more than half a dozen times. So the focus for the child, instead of focusing on what the teacher was saying and being part of the group, what was the major thing that was happening was he was being corrected and redirected constantly. If only they had allowed him sitting a little bit away, not right in the middle, maybe right next to them, but at the end of the group circle. And if he did even stretch his legs, it is okay, if that is the way he's paying attention and being part of the group. Because what was happening was, he continued to do that, and she tried to continue to correct him, and then he was asked to leave the group. So the opportunity for connection was lost. So that is where we can facilitate. In another case that I saw, this happened at maybe this was a 4th, 5th grade. This was a significant disabilities classroom. This was a self-contained classroom. There were about 7 students, and every 15, 20 minutes, they were spending time on the computer, and the computer time was much longer than their group time. And what happens when we use computer, yes, we have to use some of the computer activities to reinforce, but sometimes what is happening is the computer is becoming almost like a babysitting tool for our kids, especially those with significant needs. They spend so much time in front of the computer in the 3 hours that I observed in that classroom that I'm wondering, where is the social connectedness? Computers can actually isolate children rather than bring them together. So these are all some things that we need to be watchful when we are planning the activities for children. So I am moving on to how do we build the social emotional competence? What are different activities that we can do to strengthen that social emotional literacy? First of all, we can have this as a group activity. Get children to label their emotions. In other words, how do we adjust this? For example, you see this picture over here of all these pictures. You can come up with a situation where when he asked me to play with him, I was happy. When I went to the playground and I couldn't find a swing to swing on, I felt sad. When he pushed me down and took my toy away, I felt angry. I mean, you can create these kind of situation and have the children match the feeling with the story. And you can use assistive technology to program it. You can modify it to suit the level of students you are working with, or the grade level, or if they are early childhood, you can just have them match the picture with that feeling. And there are a variety of ways I'm going to suggest that they can do. They can role play that, they can dramatize it, and they can play a game with it. So first, they need to learn to label emotions. And in the beginning, we begin with very simple 2, 3 emotions, and then gradually build on those things. And it is important as a group, we discuss as a group, the teacher guides and says, oh, this is what is happening. Do you think he was happy or he was sad when somebody pushed him down? Or did he get angry or did he get scared? So these are all words to strengthen their emotional competence, especially children with autism who have difficulty with emotion, with sharing their feeling. It is important for them to build their confidence. The other thing that we can do is what is called the turtle technique. I won't go into it, but you would find it in the Center for Social Emotional Foundations of Learning. You will find the turtle technique thing. That is just like the calming technique, where the child, when he's feeling very agitated or angry or sad or frustrated, takes a moment to calm down. And then when he's calm, he comes up. This is something we have to routinely teach. And this is something that requires intentional teaching. And then taking calming breaths. When they are upset, you can train the whole group, the whole class to take 3 calming breaths. And then gradually increase it to 5, and then maybe to 7. So that, and you do it not just once a day, but maybe 4 times a day or 5 times a day. And each of these things will take less than a minute. But that calming breath helps children. And then you can have musical games to bring children together, have fun together, and bring that. And then one of my favorites is role play and drama. And you might say, many of these children have communication difficulties. How are they going to use? No, they just making faces, or they are holding up the card with that emotion feeling, or they are going to say, oh, I'm mad. Or if they can say that. Or if they're just holding up the card and a child who can role play acts it out, and your child who has difficulty using words can press an assistive technology device to say the feeling, and the person and the other child acts out that feeling. So you can bring various ways together to have children express their emotions. And then there is this famous bingo game that we can play. And you can begin with simple, just 4 words or 4 pictures, or a combination of 4 pictures and words together. Or some of your higher functioning children can have a card with just the words, and one child may be showing the card, or the teacher may be showing the cards with both the feeling, and they are matching it, or they may be identifying it, and whoever has their card, of course, the typical bingo game. So that's another way. And all of it, the whole purpose is you are bringing children together, but at the same time, they are expanding their vocabulary and they are expanding their emotional competence. And another game is charades game that you can play. And then again, how do you involve a child who does not use words to communicate, who has either limited or no verbal communication? That child can have either a sequential communication device, have the words, the emotion words programmed already, and she can or he can press the device, and one child may act out that feeling. And a couple of books that I would like to, especially this is one of my favorite books, and that's the book that's I have included it there. It's called On Monday When It Rained. This is a fantastic book to teach emotions. On Monday When It Rained by Cheryl Katzenmeister. And the beautiful thing about this book is the phenomenal photographs that this book shows. Okay, and of course this may be a little bit advanced, but you can use it at different levels. You can adapt the book. And this particular page, the boy says, "I am embarrassed." Why is he embarrassed? "Oh, on Wednesday, I went to preschool. We drew pictures of big animals in a zoo. My teacher, Laura, said my elephant looked just like one she saw at the zoo last summer." And then, oh, sorry, I meant the previous page. And he was embarrassed because on Tuesday, when my grandma came to dinner, we had macaroni and cheese. I drank my chocolate milk real fast. And right before we had the cookies for dessert, I burped out loud. And so I was embarrassed. So the next one that I read, that one is really feeling proud. So proud and embarrassed may be a little bit difficult, but I'm going to show you a picture where I hope you can see this clearly. He's scared. And that is a simple one. So you can take this book as a model and you can create a 4-page book yourself. Another fantastic book that I'm going to share with you also, it's called When Sophie Gets Really, Really Angry. While these books may seem like they're early childhood books, you can adapt these books or you can use these books for discussing emotional vocabulary at a higher grade level too, and use these as models to create your own teaching activities. This is a fantastic book with phenomenal pictures again, and this is a child who has difficulty sharing her toy with her younger sister. And so the parent gets a little upset with her and she goes for a walk and then comes down and comes back to share. And this is a situation very similar to what happens in a classroom when children are not willing or ready to share. And that's a story. What do we learn? I mean, with a higher grade level, you can read that story and say, what do we learn from the story? What is the lesson we learned from there? How can we adapt it? And then this is another game that you can play. It can be a game. In other words, you give a mirror and they go around using the mirror and they say, "Mirror, mirror in my hand, tell me the feeling I show." And every child has a turn. They don't have to use too many words or anything in this one. The teacher can say it, mirror, mirror in my hand on behalf, or you can have an assistive technology device programmed with it, and each child can press it, and then they can make a face, angry face, sad face, or happy face. And if the child has difficulty making those faces, the child can be given a choice of 2 or 3 feeling faces, and the child can hold it up. And if the child has difficulty grasping it, you can use an adapted glove, and the child can put the glove, and it can be attached with a Velcro, a feeling face here and a feeling face, and the child can lift up one or the other and in front of the mirror. And a peer can hold the mirror for the child. So when they get exposed to that, this, what it does, 2 things. It builds social emotional competence, but at the same time, it helps them to connect with a peer, and they are working together as a group. And then there are some wonderful calming techniques that you can build up over a period of time, along with teaching the emotion words. These activities help to strengthen self-regulation and impulse control. I'm sure many of you have heard about the mindfulness meditation practices. As a matter of fact, at the beginning of this, in 2020, I came up with a mindfulness guide, and it is for educators, administrators, educators to use, teachers to use, as a guide on some of the mindfulness-based activities that you can pursue, especially with young children at the elementary school. And also you can pursue it further. But I think when you begin when they are young, it becomes part of their lifetime practice. So I do have a mindfulness guide that a company in Austin, Texas called Education 311 published. So that gives you a lot of ideas. One of the things I mentioned earlier on is taking calming breaths, like just taking a long breath. Say, take 3 calming breaths. The other one that I'm talking about, I'm not going to go over every one of them in detail, but these are just different things you can try. The other one is called the alternate nostril breathing. That is, you hold it like this. You use these 2 fingers to hold it like this, and then the thumb on the right nostril and the other 2 fingers on the left nostril. And you can do that taking breath alternately, breathing through the left nostril and then releasing it in the right nostril, and then breathing through the right nostril and then releasing it through this kind of, they can do it in the beginning. For very young children, maybe a little bit difficult, but they can gradually practice it, and they can just do it 4 times, 5 times. Whenever you find the children are agitated, or when you find a child has to calm down, has had a significant tantrum, and the child is in a safe space, that is a time when the paraeducator or teacher takes a couple of minutes to help that child to calm down using these kind of practices. Another one is called super brain yoga, and you can Google it and you will see a detailed step-by-step guidance. You can also find, I think, in Wikipedia, how to do a super brain. It's a yoga exercise that requires both the exercise as well as it is calming. It is also, again, just like the alternate nostril, this is also cross-lateral. And the cross-lateral activities help with the brain too. And then you can have children visually imagine. They can imagine that they are seeing a beautiful butterfly flying in the garden. It's a monarch butterfly, and you can have them when they are agitated. Again, these things do not take an all day. It takes 2 or 3 minutes or even less. But if you intersperse with these calming techniques 3 or 4 times a day, it helps children to learn these techniques. And sometimes you can just remind children, What are we going to be doing? You're going to be imagining visually about a bird flying, bird is flying, and it's flying far away. The other thing that you want to use is positive reflections, thinking of others. Give them some examples. And then this is again, as a group, you teach them. Okay, when somebody goes to the playground and all the swings are taken and you're feeling sad, what can you do? Or if somebody is wanting to take a turn at the swing and you've been at the swing a long time, what can you do? You can say, okay, you can go on the swing. I'm going to go find something else to play with. So these are all things that you can help them think of others. And one of the things I want to mention here, I'm sure many of you know about social stories and social narratives that also help them to think of others and think of others' perspectives on what we are doing. And another activity that's much more, I would say, for the adults, it's called the chocolate and bricks activity, and you can certainly use it with middle school and high school students too. But you go ahead and Google it, and you will find it's a new. It has been there. This activity, this book was published many years ago, but there is a newer edition that came out in 2014, and these are called 3-minute motivators. And the chocolate and bricks help them. They kind of put that angry or intense, sad or scary feeling inside the brick, and then they blow it away and all the bad feeling is gone, and then they fill it up with chocolate, so all the positive feeling gets all over inside. And so it is that glowing chocolatey feeling that fills your mind and your heart and your body. So it is all to help them feel calmer and together with themselves, but at the same time acting very softly and gently with others so that they can connect with the other. It helps with their self-regulation. How do we do some of these things to make sure that the children with significant needs, children with autism, children with severe and multiple disabilities, how do we help them? One of the things is having a peer as a support. I'm going to begin with an example. You can see all these bullet points that I have, but let's take a child. Let's take a child either in a preschool or a kindergarten classroom. And this is a child who does not yet know how to initiate communication or play with the others. So can you bring two children together? How can we bring them together? Maybe we can set up our centers in an early childhood classroom or a kindergarten classroom in such a way that brings a child who is a little bit advanced, who is verbal, to work with a child who has limited verbal skills or who has limited social skills, to pair together and do those activities. And every center that we set up, we do it in such a way, we bring children together. And we, instead of asking that child who has difficulty communicating and interacting and establishing connection, we ask the peer who is a little bit more advanced to take the initiative. So in other words, we teach those skills to the peer so that they can. And when, let's say, an older student in a classroom who is participating, let's say, in an inclusive classroom, goes to the paraeducator to ask for help, can we set up another student to provide that help? There are two benefits. The student who is providing that support, the peer mentor, the peer person who is helping, is also gaining not only a good feeling that he's helping, but through practicing that same activity in helping the other child, his skills are getting strengthened. And there is another way we can do is that this target student who has difficulty initiating communication, does part of the work, and the other children or other student is set up in such a way that he comes to help him finish that work. And this can be as simple as, we are often asked saying that these children in the early childhood classroom or in a kindergarten classroom, they refuse to help put away things. They refuse to clean up. Why don't we provide two other children who usually do respond to these directions well, be the helper? Okay, I put one, you put one, I put one in this block box. So together they work, whether it is cleaning up or whether it's putting away things or putting the mats away, they cooperate. We set up these situations in such a way, and then we make it like a game. But we have to plan in advance to make sure we facilitate that it's happening. The other important thing that I have written about quite a bit, and I have seen it again and again, is the role of the paraeducator. That is where the teacher and the paraeducator have to work cooperatively in order to make sure that the support that we give to that child with significant and complex needs is not overdone. What do I mean by if it's not overdone? If that support is actually preventing that child from exercising any kind of independence, if it is preventing that child from communicating with peers, then we are overdoing it. We have to constantly find opportunities for our children to communicate with each other, because if they do not communicate, they are always in a world of isolation, and then they never learn how to get along. And that is the most critical thing. To be able to be functioning as part of a group is the purpose of school. So we have to teach the student how to get the attention. If they need help, how do they ask for help? And for a student who does not communicate using language, does not use verbal communication, is there a way we can use a small assistive technology device to say, I need help, or just show help? Can we repeatedly make sure we teach that so that they ask for help? So that is one way they are communicating, and also establishing communication and contact. The other thing that we can do is making sure when the child is asking for help, that it is not always the adult who is running to help, but we redirect that child to get help from a peer. And the other thing that we want to teach is to be able to read and react to different social situations. That, of course, requires intentional teaching. And one of the most important things that teachers and paraeducators have to practice is, we all have a tendency to talk. And we talk for the student instead of waiting for the response or initiate communication. So how do we promote that? How do we get that student to talk and talk less ourselves? So that is something we have to carefully look at. So the most important thing I want to say here is, we minimize that paraeducator sitting next to or constantly monitoring every action that the student exhibits, but withdraw a little bit and maximize kind of invisible and discrete support, and use the peers as the support for the student as much as possible, so that there is social togetherness and connection with their peers. And moving on to the next one. This one is Paul again. What do you use in your classroom to promote that social togetherness and social connection, so that they all learn to be friendly with each other, and they have friends that they can depend on for help. Do you play literacy and math games? Do you teach feeling words and emotional competence? Do you use peer support, peer mediated support? Do you teach calming techniques? And do you engage your students in a lot of role play? Because role play is how they strengthen their emotional competence, but at the same time, they are connecting with each other. And do you embed problem solving activities routinely in your, in your literacy activities and math activities? Okay, let me see. Okay. Looks like calming techniques is very heavily used. That's wonderful. I hope I have added something to your repertoire with a couple of additional activities. And looks like a lot of you are using peer mediated supports. Of course, the peers will need a lot of training in order to provide the adequate and the right kind of support. And looks like you use most of the activities that I mentioned there. That's wonderful. And I'm going to end the polling. And okay. And I'm going to demonstrate, illustrate some activities that you can add to your present activities. Some of the things that you can do are playing games for like musical chairs, which would be just fun activity in an early childhood classroom or a kindergarten classroom. You don't have to spend a lot of time, maybe just 10 minutes. You can certainly play the charades game, and you can also reinforce concepts through playing math and literacy games, and I'm going to explain some of them. And these things, playing games actually help with executive function. They have to remember, they have to bring it to their short-term memory from long-term memory. It also, because they are taking turns, it's cognitive flexibility and also teaches self-control, self-regulation. This is a game that I personally love. It's called the toppings game, or they can do it with pizza topping or sandwich topping or ice cream topping. And the way it works, it can be played in different ways, and you can adapt it to the particular student strengths that your students have, to the particular verbal abilities that they have. You can have assistive technology to assist you. The way it works is, the way the traditional works is, I'm going to have pizza, or I'm going to have ice cream. And on that ice cream or pizza, if it is pizza, I'm going to say, I'm going to have some tomatoes. And then the person next to me will say, I'm going to have pizza. And on that pizza, I'm going to have tomatoes and mushrooms. And it goes on, and they all take a turn naming an ingredient, but they also try to remember what the previous person said. So this builds attention, this builds memory, because they have to remember what the previous person said, and also they all learn to take turns, because nobody can jump ahead, they all have to take their turn. So this is a group action, and you can do the same thing with sandwich or taco or with ice cream. But let's say your students are not able to use words to communicate. They can use pictures, they can show up pictures. And let's say they are not able to handle half a dozen pictures that a food that will go on the pizza, they can be given a choice of 2. Or they can have, in addition to that, they can have an I talk to communicator programmed with 2 food items. And when it is their turn, they press the device. So you can adapt it in multiple ways. But this is a game that builds vocabulary, that builds attention, but at the same time gives an opportunity. And you can adapt this game to other things. You can do it with emotion words too. And this is another way. Again, this is a brainstorming game, and you can have it on your Blackboard or whatever smart board that you have. And they can come up with science words, math words, technology. I'm just using it as an example of STEM and science words. And when you're thinking of rain, as it happens in Houston, it's raining today. When you think of rain, what are all the things you can think of? You think of water, you think of wet, you can think of clouds, you can think of sky. What else can you think of? And again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, you can adapt it to the need of your child. The most important thing is they are all taking turns and they are working together as a group, and this promotes communication, but you make that adaptation for every child to participate. Not for the adult to press the device, but for the child to press the device, for the child to hold up a card, for the child to take his turn in the group. So, or a peer, as much as possible, a peer can show 2 cards, and the child with significant communication need can touch one or eye gaze one. These are all ways we bring them together. In terms of math games, again, you can use large dice and they can throw the dice. They can take turns. They can add the numbers together, or they can point to the numbers, but they all take turns going around, tossing the dice and taking turns. And they can use it in a number of ways. And one of the things that I think it'll be a lot of fun is to use I have to go back and show you. This is a hula hoop, and they have to throw their dice, or they have to throw their bean bag and a specific number of bean bags. You may say number 3, number 5. This, I'm assuming that the children have significant cognitive difficulties. You may give a number, or a peer may show a number, and then they have to throw that within that hula hoop. Why the hula hoop? Why the large dice? It makes it far more fun, and the students are more likely to be engaged, and higher levels of motivation increases the level of learning. So you can use beanbag, you can use dice, and again, all sitting around as a group, and you can have one child add 2 numbers together who is higher functioning, and you can have one child count the numbers, and you can have one child actually make a choice between 2 numbers. As they throw the dice and it says 3, they can say, is it 2 or 3, making a choice. So these are all adaptations that we need to make in order to facilitate not only the number knowledge, but also the group functioning. The same thing we can do with, children can team together. You have a child who loves to play with blocks. Let's say this is a child with autism. Then you can have a peer helping him. And if he likes to play, you train that peer mentor to work in such a way. Instead of asking the child with autism to go and work with this other child, you bring that child to see how. So they are building, let's say, a pattern using the blocks. How can the other child help him to make sure that pattern is continued? Or if they're building something, how can he help? So the way we also introduce that child, he wants to play with you. He wants to build it together. He wants to work on the pattern together. Instead of just saying, okay, you go and help him. we have to make sure we facilitate that very gently and contrive it in such a way they are working together. So, and then with older children, they can actually set up like a little store, mock store in the classroom, and they could be running that. And the children could act as customers. They can be the store person who is selling the stuff, and then there is the store assistant who is also helping with that. So we bring them together in different ways for them to communicate and bring. And you can use one of AbleNet's um, uh, devices. This is the alternate spinner, and you can put pictures on that. You can use it for emotions, you can use it for numbers, you can use it for vocabulary. Of course, this is not a voice production device. It's just they spin it, and when they spin it, wherever it points, the child either matches that number or matches the word. So each child has a turn, and whoever wins the most points is the winner. You know, you can have that kind of a competing competition game. And let's look at some scenarios. I know I may be running over time, but let's look at these things. Alan is a preschool student. He has autism, and he plays alone during center time. How do we get him to play? What we have to do, we have to identify his interest and try to pair him with somebody else who may or may not have identical interest, but you can train him to say, you know what, Alan needs some help. I would like you to go and help him with that. And let's say Alan loves to play with the blocks. Can he help him? Or if Alan likes to read books, and I have seen a child with autism with tremendous capability in reading, but wanted to be all alone in the book center by himself, did not want anybody else to come. So that is where we have to gradually train, a few minutes at a time, gradually have that other child also share that book center in order to establish that connection. And then we add one more child and make that book center 3 children. And the same thing, then we gradually have Alan participate in the housekeeping center, participate in the block center. And then when we have maybe water play, how we have 4 or 5 children sharing that water table or water play and working together. Or we set up activities like floating and sinking, and they're all working together. So these are all ways we have to maneuver so that there is social togetherness. Let us say you have a child who uses mainly eye gaze and does not use verbal communication, but she loves the company of peers. How do we promote that? How do we promote social interaction with others? Can we have some of the children come and read a little bit to her? But it should not be just one side, the other child reads a story and leaves away, but we should provide for some opportunity for Selena also to engage besides just smiling. So we have to make sure that there's a little bit of back and forth. We have to provide them to, so that Selena also shows some pictures to the other child, then the other child reads a book, and we have to train the peer who is teaching, ask Selena to touch this, ask Selena to point to this. So we have to train. It is not enough if we say, you go read a little story to her. So when we have children coming, let's say from another classroom, to read a story to Selena, we have to provide that training to that peer mentor. Let's say we have Ahmad, and he uses a wheelchair. And every time he goes to the playground, he watches all the other children play, but he has no role to play. And nobody, he goes there, he has a paraeducator kind of near him. All the other children are playing, he's watching, and then he returns back to the classroom. That is a situation where we can have him engage with the others. What do we do? every time that he goes out to the playground for recess, he takes something with him which will attract. Maybe one day it's a bubble. He blows the bubble if he can blow the bubble. And then the other children are attracted for a few minutes and they come and stand around him and he has the opportunity. Another day, he may take a magnet with him and the other children may be attracted by the magnet. They come and at least that will engage. And, one child will say magnet and then Ahmad will listen to the word magnet. And then they will say, hey, see, the pin is sticking. Oh, the spoon is not sticking. Oh, the spoon is sticking. It's a metal spoon. So that excitement will energize Ahmad and he will feel part of a group. Another student, Edward, he doesn't initiate communication, but he is capable of communication. He is diagnosed with autism. And every time he goes to lunch, there is a paraeducator sitting next to him and he doesn't engage in any communication. So that is a situation where the paraeducator can leave him alone with the others, but in proximity and say, Edward, do you want to tell them about the park that you went to where you saw all those wonderful trees or flowers or something else, or to the zoo or to that special place or the football game you watched? Kind of give some kind of to engage his thought process, mention something and then leave aside. These are all ways we can build that communication and social togetherness. Because of time, I'm going to say, just mention that video modeling is a fantastic technique and it's an evidence-based practice that you can use with children to teach them specific social skills. And of course, I just want to mention the pandemic has thrown a lot of challenges in supporting that social togetherness. Some of the activities that I mentioned, you can adapt it to virtual teaching too. Hopefully, many of us will be returning back to the classroom. But the most important thing I want to mention here is it is very critical that we work closely with the parents especially during this time, but going forward, we work with them. If we identify a student in the classroom who's friendly with that target student who has autism or significant needs, we want to make that connection and we want to share that information with the two families or with several families together so that that friendship and the social communication continues for that child. And I think I've just finished in time. I'm extremely grateful to AbleNet University for hosting this webinar. And I'm extremely thankful to each and every one of you for joining this webinar. I hope many of your students enjoy that social connection and social togetherness, because that is really the ticket for life. And we, as educators, have the capacity to do it. And I do want to mention a couple of things. First Book, the name is First Book. They have released a kind of a trauma kit, and you can check out at their website. It just came yesterday, so I didn't include the link here. It's called the Trauma Kit. It's from the organization called First Book. The other thing I wanted to mention is I am presenting a special pre-conference workshop focused on significant disabilities at the CEC's International Conference coming up in March. Council for Exceptional Children. It's a pre-conference workshop focused on interventions for young learners with significant needs. But how do you provide environmental and instructional supports and adaptations? And my next webinar for AbleNet focuses on the topic of proactive interventions and supports for students with autism spectrum disorders. It's on April 8th at the same time. I look forward to seeing many of you. Thank you very much. Hope you stay safe and well. All the best to you. Thank you.